Paradox Lost by Stephen R. Originally published in Other Worlds Science Stories, November 1955. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Well, it's not very pleasant not knowing, I can assure you of that, the Lost Paradox said earnestly. Oh, I don't know, an aphorism replied, mildly contradicting the paradox. It's being that's important. Just say anon. Anon, the paradox shuddered. It's like admitting to being a bastard. Where am I? A high, nervous voice demanded. They all turned tolerantly to look at the new arrival. It was a short joke, slightly off colour. In the world of ideas, an old, drawn-out joke explained kindly, taking a fatherly interest in the newcomer. Oh, the short joke said. My creator was, he added with an air of importance, naming a well-known television star. See, the paradox said, starting to get excited. The first thing, my creator was. How can I say anon? I'll be ostracized. If you think he's bad, a trite proverb said, breaking into the conversation, you should talk to the theories sometime, if you can talk to them. They're a highbrow bunch. Try Einstein theory. Him and his MC squared. Phooey. An MC squared? Impossible, the old drawn-out joke said. I've been around a long time, and I've seen them all, and I've yet to see a square MC. They're all lean and tall, with lots of teeth. You're talking about different MCs, the great idea said in a superior tone. Obviously we're talking about different MCs, the old drawn-out joke said huffily. That's just what I said. I've never seen a square MC. Haven't you ever been able to find out when you're called back? A wild guess asked the Lost Paradox sympathetically. I don't get called back very often, the paradox admitted sadly, and it's probably because I am anon. I'll bet if G.K. Chesterton was my creator, I'd get called back a lot. But how come you don't know? The great idea demanded querulously, as though he felt that it was the paradox's fault. It was one of those witty parties, the paradox explained bitterly. Everybody was being very bright and talking at once. Suddenly I found myself out there, in the middle of a crowd of inane puns, and I didn't have the slightest idea where I came from. Didn't you investigate? The short joke asked incredulously. It's so important to know. My creator was... Of course I investigated, the Lost Paradox interrupted him savagely. But nobody was listening to anybody else, only to themselves, so it wasn't possible to find out from anyone but my creator himself. After darting in and out of brains, bumping into jokes and guesses and hopes coming out, I still didn't reach the right person before the party broke up. Once it was over, of course, I came right up here. Why? A Socratic question demanded. Why? The Lost Paradox echoed, bewildered. Why, because we always come here. Why not go back and find out? The Socratic question demanded. Go back without being called? The Lost Paradox laughed bitterly. Where am I going to find a head that's not crammed to overflowing with dreams, ideas, guesses, and hopes? They'd throw me out before I got past the dandruff. I know a place, an idea said in a small voice. They all looked at it with interest. It was a very tiny idea, unimportant, not particularly original. "Where?" the great idea demanded skeptically. "My creator," the small idea said in a very low, unsure voice. "Your creator," the great idea sneered. "Now wait a minute," the aphorism interrupted. "Everyone deserves a chance." "Why your creator?" he asked the small idea kindly. "Because," the small idea said, gathering courage, "my creator's head is empty, nothing from ear to ear." "No dreams?" a romantic dream demanded incredulously. "No hopes?" a subconscious wish asked. "No guesses?" a poor guess blurted out. "No, nothing," the small idea replied. "I go back quite often without being called." "Incredible," the great idea said. "I'd like to check this. Are there any other ideas of his around?" "No," the small idea said. "I'm the only one." "You?" the great idea said, looking at him in astonishment. "Do you mean you're the only original idea he's had in all his life?" "Well, he isn't a bad one," the aphorism said, again coming to the little idea's assistance. "A variation of the old brotherly love and do unto your neighbours thought." "An entirely empty head," the old drawn-out joke said slowly, a note of greed creeping into his voice. "I'm sorry," the small idea said, and there was real regret in his voice, "but you can't come." "What?" the old drawn-out joke demanded, stupefied. "I'm sorry," the small idea said firmly, "but he's an awfully nice guy, and there's nothing like an old drawn-out joke to ruin a nice guy." "He has only had one idea in his life, and he's a nice guy," the old drawn-out joke sneered. "Sure," the lost paradox said. "You don't have to have brains to be a nice guy. As a matter of fact, it helps not to have them." "Will you go down with us?" the small idea asked the great idea humbly. "Will I go down?" the great idea said enthusiastically. "A chance to get back without being called. Try and stop me." "I'd like a nice congenial crowd," the small idea continued with the stubborn perseverance of the meek. "Something on a high level? Lost paradox, some of the better short jokes, a few advanced theories, a couple of good guesses. You pick them. You know everybody so much better than I." "Don't worry," the great idea said enthusiastically. "I know the best, and they'll all be raring to go. Even," he said with a wicked smile, "Einstein theory. I'll make him sweat, though, before I ask him. Imagine, an almost empty head. By God, thousands of us can cram into it." "Well, now don't get carried away," the small idea said nervously. "Let's aim for quality, not quantity. After all, we want to help Lost Paradox here find his creator." "Don't worry," the great idea said as he bustled off. "Quality and quantity it is, with sufficient diversification to break the monotony." "Space," the great idea said later, stretching out comfortably. "I haven't seen such space in centuries." "You didn't exaggerate," he said, turning fondly to the small idea. "Not a thing from ear to ear." "Well, he certainly wasn't my creator," the lost paradox said, wandering around nervously. "But he is a nice guy, isn't he?" the small idea asked eagerly. He felt ill at ease among the crowd of bustling theories, guesses, intuitions, jokes, puns, and all the rest of the diversified crowd that had been brought along by the great idea. "A very sympathetic character," an ethical proverb said approvingly. Raymond Higgins Bottomley smiled vaguely at Smathers, his valet, as he slipped his arms into the jacket that Smathers had picked for him to wear on this very important occasion. Uncle Alfred Bottomley had called a meeting of the Bottomley clan for 10 o'clock, a completely uncivilized hour, probably to decide to whom he would turn over control of the Bottomley interests. Really, Raymond thought as he buttoned the jacket, he didn't feel quite up to it this morning. His head was buzzing strangely, as though he had a hangover, minus the headache. Unaccustomed flashes of upsetting thought disturbed the even tenor of his usually pleasant vegetable reactions to the movement of life around him. Pulling the sport jacket straight, he looked at it in the mirror. Red checks with brown stripes. He looked well in it. Medium tall, slim, broad-shouldered, with a face consisting of entirely average features put carefully together in a way designed to avoid attracting attention, yet achieve a pleasant effect. His brown-blonde hair was combed neatly in a conventional part. He frowned a bit at his image in the mirror. Were red checks exactly the thing to wear to a business meeting? Uncle Alfred had always been a little on the conservative side. Then the frown disappeared. Smathers had picked it out, and Smathers knew all about those things. Probably what all the captains of finance and industrial tycoons were wearing to business meetings this year. Smathers, tall, lean, saturnine, stared patiently at his young master's back without a qualm of his well-insulated conscience. He was fond of Raymond. He had never had an easier post or a more considerate master. But fond as he was of the young man, he was fonder of money, and when cousin George Bottomley had casually fluttered $1,000 check in his vicinity, he had met temptation more than halfway by offering to do his part to send Raymond Higgins Bottomley to Uncle Alfred Bottomley, dressed in a manner calculated to convince that old man once and for all that nephew Raymond was a complete jackass, which, of course, was not too far off the mark. He was, Smathers rationalized, only allowing the truth to out. Even at that, Smathers did not really believe that he was doing the young man any harm. He did not think that Raymond had any more chance at the Bottomley millions than he, Smathers, had. Cousins George and Harold were two tough birds, and Smathers strongly suspected that a checked suit was only one of a number of steps that they would take to keep Raymond Bottomley and some millions of dollars well apart. "Well," Raymond said, turning from the mirror reluctantly, "I'm off to the races." "Yes, sir. Good luck, sir," Smathers said, gliding to the door. "Thank you, Smathers," Raymond said. That buzzing in his head still bothered him, and he felt in no hurry to leave. "Really, I feel that this suit is just thing. Don't know what I'd do without you, Smathers. Really, I don't." "I try my best, sir," Smathers said, opening the door, his thin face impassive. "The road to hell," Raymond said, in a strangely clear voice, "is paved with good intentions." Smathers' lower jaw dropped abruptly until it was stopped by a protruding corner of his bow tie. What did you mean by that, sir?" he whispered as he fought to regain his composure. A surprised expression covered Raymond's pleasant face. "Why, I really don't know," he said, bewildered. "It just seemed to come out. Isn't it a saying of some sort or something?" "It is, sir," Smathers said, standing stiffly by the door. "Well, good-bye," Raymond said unhappily. "I have to pick up Uncle's secretary, Sylvia, so I'd better get a move on." Smathers closed the door very, very slowly after Raymond left. Raymond manoeuvred his convertible into traffic, driving slowly. It was just one of these beautiful sunny days when it seemed like a crime to hurry anywhere. People behind him pounded their horns, then came screeching by with distorted faces and bulging eyes, leaning out of the windows and screaming unprintable insults at him. It hurt him to see these examples of man's inability to get along with man, and it filled him with a great sadness and a great pity for the human race. After a while he began to shout back at them, "Quo vadis? Quo vadis?" He wondered what it meant. He pulled up in front of the brownstone house in the West 70s where Sylvia lived, and he blew 4 short blasts on his auto horn. After a minute she came out of the doorway. The sun caught her auburn hair, and its red highlights sparkled in the clear air. She waved to Raymond and started bouncing down the stairs, a petite, vibrant bundle of life. "Oh, my love is like the red, red rose," he murmured to himself. "That's newly sprung in June." He stopped abruptly. "Good heavens," he thought, "I'm in love." With a worried frown, he absent-mindedly opened the car door for Sylvia. He barely noticed her as she climbed in beside him. First he had awakened with that buzzing in his head. Then he had started spouting things that he didn't even understand, including a poem about a rose that he had never heard before, and now he had found out that he was in love with his uncle's secretary, an old friend of the family whom he had known for years. It was all too confusing. That's the sort of thing that came from getting up before 10 in the morning, he thought moodily. "Why so serious?" Sylvia asked, her voice soft. "I hope you're not worried about your uncle's decision," she continued, her voice fading almost to a whisper. "My uncle's decision?" Raymond said, looking up in surprise. "No, I wasn't thinking about that." "Oh, I'm glad," she said. She paused, then went on. "I think he's pretty well decided on your cousin George, and I didn't want you to be disappointed." "No," Raymond said, swinging the car away from the curb. "Why should I be disappointed? Everybody knows that George is much better at that sort of thing than I am. Why, he even tells me when to buy and sell securities." "But aren't you a little worried?" Sylvia asked, looking out of the car window. "I've heard it said that George said that he'd cut off your income from the business if he ever got the chance." Raymond looked at her, shocked. "You can't believe everything you hear," he said sternly. Sylvia looked away, out at the passing scenery. Raymond pulled the convertible up to the curb beside the towering building that was the heart of Bottomley Enterprises Limited. He snapped off the motor, then sat there with a frown on his face. "Well?" Sylvia demanded, surprised. "Aren't you going to get out?" Yes," Raymond said. "But before we go up, there's something I want to ask you." Sylvia laughed. "I thought you didn't care about the decision. Go ahead, you can always ask. But remember, as your uncle's private secretary, I reserve the right to refuse to give out any information that might be contrary to his interests." "Oh, that," Raymond said. "I wasn't thinking about that. As a matter of fact, I just thought I'd tell you that I love you and ask you to marry me or something." Her face softened, and Raymond caught his breath as he saw how beautiful she looked under her crown of red hair. "Oh, Raymond," she said, "I am sorry. I mean, I think you're the nicest boy," she bit her lip, "the nicest man I've ever known, and I like you awfully much, but you're not the type man I would marry." Raymond opened the door, climbed out of the car awkwardly, and moved around to open her door. "That's all right," he said. "I just thought I'd mention it, that's all." "But I'm terribly flattered," she said, getting out, "and you're awfully good-looking." She stared at him. "Oh, Raymond," she suddenly wailed, "if you were only a bit different." "That's all right," he murmured automatically. He felt sorry. She seemed so upset. "I just thought I'd ask." "I suppose you'll marry George now," he added reflectively. "George?" She looked surprised. "How did you know that he had asked?" Raymond shrugged, and taking Sylvia's arm, he steered her through the revolving doors into the stainless steel and concrete palace that governed his uncle's empire. All the way up in the elevator, the buzzing in his head grew worse. He began to worry about whether he would have to call on one of these expensive chaps who did something about heads, psychologists, or psychoanalysts, or psychiatrists. First, he would have to find out which of them was good for a buzzing head. Everything was so confusing. It would be so much simpler if they had one kind of chap plainly labelled as a head mechanic. They entered Alfred Bottomley's great office with the ease bred of familiarity. Uncle Alfred was not behind his tremendous mahogany desk, but George and Harold Bottomley were standing in the centre of the thick carpet that covered the floor. "Well, well," George said, looking up with a sneer as they entered. "If it isn't Racy Raymond, that's quite an outfit." Raymond looked uneasily at their neat pinstriped black suits and shifted uncomfortably. George and Harold looked a lot alike, and yet very different. George was lean, with a long nose and small beady eyes. His complexion was sallow. Harold, with the same features, was fat. His eyes, like pigs, lay lost deep in the fat of his face. His complexion was as ruddy as his brother's was sallow. "Smathers said that this suit was all right," Raymond said uncertainly. Harold laughed. "You must tell Uncle Alfred that you don't know how to dress yourself yet, and blame it all on your valet. He'll like that." Sylvia interrupted, speaking quickly. "I'd better go and tell him that you're all here." She walked soundlessly across the great office and through the small door that led into the inner office. "If I were you," George said quickly, "I'd get out of here and change clothes before Uncle Alfred sees you. Otherwise, you'll be a dead duck." "Do you think so?" Raymond asked nervously, turning to Harold. "I certainly do, and you'd better hurry," Harold urged. Raymond turned with sudden decision and started towards the door. "Stop, you idiot!" a commanding voice snapped from behind him. "Do you think I'd give you any consideration at all if you was too stupid to be present at a meeting called to determine your own future?" The old man walked slowly behind his desk. He paused for a moment to regard his nephews. Then he sank down into the deep easy-chair that served as his throne. He had a head that could have been carved of ivory. So white and translucent was his skin, eroded into deep gullies by flowing time. But his nose was large and hooked, like the beak of an eagle, and his eyes were black, piercing, and clear. George, Harold, and Raymond sank quietly into deep leather easy chairs and looked at the head behind the desk in silence. Sylvia sat in a straight chair to the left of the desk, a stenographer's notebook open and her pencil poised. Alfred Bottomley tapped his fingers restlessly on the top of his desk, and he studied his nephews through old, bright eyes that had studied too many men for too many years to have any illusions left as to what he saw before him. He wondered if he was wasting his time, if he couldn't have made the decision just as well in privacy. He let his eyes wander over the young men before him. George Bottomley, a cunning rogue, completely untrustworthy, with a strong will, who would not hesitate to turn on his uncle if he could gain absolute control of the company. Unfortunately, too cunning, too grasping and greedy to succeed, because he would never know that exact moment when he should stop and compromise. Harold Bottomley, as cunning and unscrupulous as his brother, with a better sense of how far he could push a man, but without his brother's drive. A weak man given to allowing emotion rather than reason to dictate his decisions. And finally, Raymond, a nice boy, loyal, trustworthy, and an utter nincompoop. And from these three he had to choose one to carry on the Bottomley company. His eyes fell on his secretary. Really, of all those assembled in the room, she was the most competent. She knew the business backwards and forwards. She had drive, energy, and common sense. But she was a woman, and she was not a Bottomley. He glanced at the three young men before him. To give it to all three would not work, because in the resulting struggle George would inevitably win. If he was going to give it to George, he might as well do it directly now. But first, to go through the motions of the interview. "Raymond," his still vital voice snapped, "why did you come here in that ridiculous outfit?" Raymond opened his mouth to mutter something about Smathers, and was surprised to hear himself say, "A wolf in sheep's clothing." A ghost of a smile passed over the face of the old man. "You mean," he asked softly, "that you have been disguising your wolfish characteristics all these years by acting as a rather foolish sheep?" "Bear would be better," Harold interrupted with a nasty laugh. "It might interest you to know, Uncle Alfred, that Cousin Raymond has been unloading the company's stock as fast as he could these last few weeks." The old man's eyes widened imperceptibly in surprise. "Has anyone else been selling?" he demanded in a hard voice. "I certainly haven't," Harold said, a prim smile on his fat face. George shook his head no, with vehemence, a confident sneer on his lean face. "Well," the old man said, shifting his eyes to Raymond, "why?" Raymond squirmed uncomfortably in his chair. In a vague way he began to suspect that he was being framed. He opened his mouth to explain that he bought and sold his interests as George advised, and that he actually didn't know what he had been selling, even though he knew how Uncle Alfred would react to that news of his incompetence. But somehow nothing came out of his open mouth. He gulped. His throat felt dry, and he opened his lips to try again. "After us, the deluge," he heard himself say. Uncle Alfred frowned. "Your practice of answering in old saws, while it undoubtedly saves words, could become boring in time." He paused and thought for a moment. "Yes," he continued, nodding his head. "I must confess that I think you're absolutely right. There's no doubt that the value of Bottomley enterprises will drop sharply when my retirement is announced publicly. You should be able to buy them back at a handsome profit." He stared in puzzlement at his surprising nephew. A wolf in sheep's clothing? Well, maybe. If so, it had been a clever move. One that probably had thrown George off the track long ago. "Did you sell on your own?" Alfred Bottomley demanded. "Or did someone advise you?" "As a matter of fact, Uncle," George interrupted before Raymond could answer, nervously twisting his thin fingers together, "I advised him to sell." Alfred Bottomley ignored him, and his eyes continued to bore into Raymond's questioningly. Raymond opened his mouth nervously. "Well, autant d'hommes, autant d'avis." "My God!" George screeched. "Speak English!" Alfred silenced him with a look. "The point," the old man said, "is well taken. There are as many opinions as there are men. Advice does not matter. Action does. You sold, and George, who advised you, didn't." "Look here," George said, standing up, his normally sallow face red with rage. "I've listened to enough of my idiot cousin's nonsense. He's just pulling your leg, Uncle. He's talking nonsense, and you're falling for it. Give him a straight yes-or-no question about the business and see how much he knows." "French," George snorted as he sat down. "Why, he can't even speak pig Latin." The old man listened to the tirade without moving. He would go along with George, but he hoped that he was wrong. He was surprised by his nephew Raymond, and it had been many years since a human being had been able to surprise him. "All right," the old man said abruptly. "Here is a problem that actually arose recently, and that lies close to the heart of the matter. A shipload of vegetable oil destined for Mexico has been refused by the consignee, as his agents have discovered that it is just beginning to turn rancid. The ship is in Panama. The day is in January. Now there are 3 other customers expecting shipment of that quantity of oil. One is in Bombay, one in Sweden, one in Argentina. To whom and when should the ship be sent?" Raymond's jaw fell open. Vegetable oil. So they handled that too. "Go ahead, Brain Trust," George sneered. There was a confident smile on his thin face, and he sat with his hands folded comfortably across his stomach. "Damn," Raymond thought, "he knows the answer." He saw Sylvia's eyes on him. He almost thought he saw tears glistening in them, but it might have been the light. "Wait," he said desperately. "Why should I have to answer first? Let George try and see if he knows the answer." The old man shook his head irritably. "Answer, answer," he said. "You'll all have a chance at it." Raymond glanced desperately around at their faces, searching for a clue. Those were tears in Sylvia's eyes, he noted absently. Well, there was nothing to do but jump. 1 chance out of 3. "I'd send it to Bombay," he started, and he caught the quickly repressed look of triumph that flickered across George's face. "At the Greek Callans," he heard himself finish. There it was again. He was saying things that he didn't understand, and the buzzing in his head was worse. "Ad calendas Graecas," the old man echoed softly. But his expression was inscrutable. George was on his feet, Clever, he sneered. Clever to give the date in Latin to throw us off. But it won't help, because you have the wrong place. I'd send it to Sweden, and immediately. Why? The old man asked. Because, George said triumphantly, it's winter in the northern hemisphere, and I'd get it into a cold climate as soon as possible to stop further spoilage. And you? Alfred Bottomley demanded, turning his black eyes on to Harold. The fat man pursed his lips. The same as George, he finally said. Certainly never to Bombay. Alfred Bottomley stood up warily. He turned to Raymond. I'm sorry, he began. Oh, that's all right, Raymond muttered, standing up also. Don't feel bad about it. I don't— I'm sorry, the old man began again in a firm tone, interrupting Raymond. To have to place the direction of Bottomley Enterprises on your hitherto carefree shoulders as of tomorrow. What? George screeched wildly, leaping to his feet. Why, you're insane! That shipment would never reach Bombay before it became so rancid that it would have to be dumped. What do you mean? He raved. He can't be right. The old man barely batted an eyelash. Shall I explain, or do you want to? He asked Raymond calmly. Please do, uncle, Raymond said, feeling badly in need of an explanation himself. As any educated person knows, the old man said stiffly, there were no calends in the Greek calendar. Hence, the Latin expression at the Greek calends meaning never, which is, of course, the correct answer. Bottomley Enterprises never would deliberately try and palm off oil that could even be suspected of being rancid on a customer. As a matter of fact, the oil was sold for what it was right there in Panama. I must say that the way in which Raymond was able to give the correct answer to me without letting either of you two know was a revelation to me. The lad is indeed a wolf in sheep's clothing. By the way, Raymond, the old man continued, after tomorrow I won't interfere in your business, but today, while I'm still president, may I advise you to speak to Miss Sylvia Robbins about staying in your employ. She knows the business as well as I do, and will be a tremendous help. Raymond said, licking his lips nervously. I'll speak to her. He started to walk towards Sylvia, and he realized that she had stood up and was looking up at him with a strange, half-frightened look on her face. He was dimly aware that Uncle Alfred had left, closely followed by two vociferous nephews. You were wonderful, she whispered. He heard his own voice start again, softly, saying, Who is Sylvia? What is she, that all us swains commend her? There were other words, all nice, that she seemed to like, so he didn't try to stop their flow. Very pretty, the lost paradox said bitterly, but I'm still anon. Oh, stop complaining, a trite expression snapped. It's nice to have a place where we can come to when we're tired of waiting in the world of ideas to be called. I'm going back now, but I'll be visiting again. What worries me, the little idea who started it all said nervously, is what will happen when she discovers that while he's a swell guy, his grey matter isn't as profuse as she might now expect. Maybe she won't notice it, the trite expression volunteered hopefully. Love is blind, said an old saying. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And if you get lonely in the night, consider becoming a member of the channel. There's no pressure.